All right. So there is a ton of uncertainty about what DC will look like in 2025. I looked at the Wall Street Journal before I came over here, and their projections were that the House is a toss-up, whether it will be led by Democrats or led by Republicans. The presidential race is a toss-up. The Senate will probably go to the Republicans, but there's a lot of uncertainty there too. With complete or near complete certainty, we know one thing, and that is that in 2025, the tax code will open up again. So in 2018, when President Trump was the president, he passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And what Congress does occasionally is to make a bill look less expensive, they make it expire, or they make the provisions expire. So the Trump tax cuts expire in 2025. There is broad agreement that there is bipartisan support for extending the Trump tax cuts, for not letting people's personal income taxes go up. So in 2025, we will be talking about taxes in all certainty, no matter what happens to the White House, no matter what happens to Congress. As it turns out, the US has historically made climate policy through the tax code. And so what I'm going to talk about is some research, kind of building off of what Chris was saying, some research that is trying to kind of think forward about what the policy discussion might look like in 2025 and help policymakers kind of think about different decisions and the impacts of those. So this is talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the Biden administration's signature climate policy act, and really making the point that a lot of what is happening with the Inflation Reduction Act is through the tax code. We're providing lots of tax incentives to incentivize things like investment in low carbon electricity, investment in clean transportation. That's the big light blue bar there corresponding to transport. And you might have heard numbers about the Inflation Reduction Act. Actually, let me just explain. This is from some research that I've done with colleagues that projects that the Inflation Reduction Act over the 10-year period will cost nearly $1 trillion. You might have heard different numbers associated with the Inflation Reduction Act. The number that came out of DC, that came out of the official estimates, was more like $400 billion, so a lot less than what we're projecting here. But the key to that is because the Inflation Reduction Act is mainly operating through the tax code and offering these tax credits, we don't know how those tax credits are going to be taken up. It's up to individuals to decide whether to buy electric vehicles. It's up to companies to decide how much to invest in wind and solar generation. And so our estimate is that 85% of the Inflation Reduction Act is through the tax code. So what we're doing in this other paper that I want to talk to you about is basically saying, okay, imagine that the Republicans get all three. It's a Republican trifecta. What do we think will happen with climate policy? Because as I said, there's going to be some discussion around the tax basis. What happens if there's a Democratic trifecta? So what I'm representing here is kind of the reference case. I think this is actually very unlikely to be the outcome of 2025. This is assuming that IRA stays in place, the Inflation Reduction Act stays in place, and there are no adjustments to it. And what we're plotting here in the black is historical emissions in the US, and in the blue, dark blue line is what we're anticipating will happen with just the Inflation Reduction Act. What you see is that emissions will definitely come down, but not by enough to meet the Biden administration's goal of a 50 to 52% reduction relative to 2005 levels. Okay, so what if there's a Republican trifecta? We think, in the paper, we're calling this kind of a neutral. It's the scenario where we repeal IRA. We're not associating it with a particular outcome of the elections. In my head, this is the Republican trifecta outcome. So there's some chance that the Republicans would then decide to repeal, the Democrats' signature climate bill. There would be a lot of political push to do that. And so if that happens, you see with the yellow line that emissions actually continue to come down, but by nowhere near the same rate as with the Inflation Reduction Act. The other thing that we've done is say, imagine that there's a Democratic trifecta. If somehow, the polls are wrong and the Democrats take control of the Senate, maybe they'll decide to expand the Inflation Reduction Act. And so what we've modeled here is a pretty big expansion of that act. We've increased the tax credits by 50%, but I'll show you in a second how much that costs. It costs a fair amount, but it doesn't do, it doesn't do a ton to emissions. It's not as impactful. It just gets more and more expensive to try to have tax credits to reduce emissions. Okay, so a third scenario that we've added is the economist's dream. Let's imagine that Congress finds a way to impose a carbon fee, we're calling it. It's basically a price on carbon emissions. That, in addition to IRA, really drives reductions. So in some of the discussions, especially in the corner of Twitter that I follow, there was really this kind of debate about, is IRA the sign that carbon pricing is dead and carbon pricing will never show up? We've kind of gone down the different path. We're subsidizing, offering tax credits instead of taxing. But what we want to emphasize is they're not in conflict. They can work together. You can have both IRA with the subsidies, and you can also have a carbon tax. And this drives emissions really rapidly. This is a pretty modest carbon price. It's about $15 a ton. In the EU right now, they're at about $100 a ton. And we're exempting retail gasoline because we think that's more politically possible. We've also done an even bigger carbon price here, so on the order of $65 a ton, and that gets us below, that achieves the goals of 2030, reducing emissions by 50 to 52%. Okay, so that's in terms of emissions. We're mapping these out, but I motivated this thinking about the fiscal implications. The estimates are that extending the Trump tax cuts, which, as I said, there's bipartisan agreement should happen, that will cost $4 trillion over the budget window. So what we want to do is think about what are the budget implications, what are the revenue implications for the government of these different climate policies. So we talked about repealing IRA. Repealing IRA, it's terrible for the climate. It makes emissions higher, as we showed with the yellow line, higher than they would be with the reference case, but it does bring in about $1.5 trillion. That's higher than what I said was our estimate for the IRA when it was passed, because we're kind of shifting the budget window forward. We're starting to look from 2025 to 2035, and IRA, it continues to have these tax credits, so the tax credits kind of become more and more expensive over time. All right, so let's add a fee to IRA. That gives us $600 billion. It's not the whole amount of the Trump tax cuts, but it's a decent amount. Let's add the high fee. That gives us $2 trillion over the budget window. So it would pay for half of that. So when I was in DC, I learned the term not forecasting, but hope casting. And so you might think that this is what I am doing, that economists have been talking all the time about carbon prices. We haven't found our way to it. Am I just like hope casting that one will show up in 2025? Maybe. But I've also talked to some lobbyists down there, and one of them described the carbon fee. Nobody has actually ruled this out. We think it's really important to build the evidence base, to kind of put the numbers in front of staffers, let them know what it would do in terms of emissions, let them know what the revenue benefits would be. So I talked to a lobbyist, and she described the carbon price as potentially a 2 a.m. solution. She said, no one's going to campaign on it. It's not a winner from a political perspective. If they include it with the extension of the Trump tax cuts, they won't announce it. Like, they'll announce the tax cuts, the carbon fee will be buried, but it might come out as something that delivers revenue and something that's benefit. It might come out of these 2 a.m. discussions. So we'll see. Come back to me in 2025, but just wanted to present this as an example of the types of research and the types of things that the Climate Policy Center could help communicate about. Thank you.